Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. In the last session, we discussed about what is the Docker. We discussed about what is Docker, Docker installation in Linux, Docker commands, Docker architecture, and we discussed about Docker commands. Am I right? We covered these topics in the last session. So first, what is the Docker? Docker is a containerization software which is used to run the application as a container. So Docker is going to take care of application code and application environment setup. Docker will take care of application code execution with the environment setup. Right. Docker is used to simplify application execution in multiple platforms. Docker will take care of everything which is required in terms of configurations to run our application. We installed Docker in our Linux machine in the AWS. Docker architecture. So as we have seen that in our projects, we are going to create a Docker file. We are going to create Docker file in our project. The Docker file contains the instructions for the Docker software. Once we created the Docker file, then we are going to build that Docker file. When we build that Docker file, it is going to create a Docker image. It is going to create a Docker image. When we run that Docker image, then it is going to create a Docker container. It is going to create Docker container. So this is the architecture of our Docker. First, we need to create a Docker file. In this Docker file, the commands will be available. What this Docker has to do, what configuration it has to do for our application. We are going to set up that instructions in the Docker file. We will understand how to write this Docker file also. Once you created this Docker file, then you need to build this Docker file. When we build this Docker file, one Docker image will be created. Whenever we run this Docker image, then it is going to create a Docker container. That a Docker container we can execute. The Docker, whenever we build that image, whenever we build the Docker file, Docker image will be created. Whenever we run that image, container is going to start and it is going to run our application. Now, whatever the Docker image is created, that Docker image we can store in Docker Hub. These Docker images can be stored into Docker Hub. It is a repository. We can call it as Docker Hub, where we can store our Docker images. Multiple people can pull our Docker image and they can execute. So this is architecture of our Docker. So Docker file will be available. Docker file contains the instructions to set up the infrastructure to execute our application. When we build the Docker file, Docker image will be created. Docker images you can store in the Docker Hub. We can pull the image and we can run that image. When we run the Docker image, Docker container is going to execute. So this is architecture of the Docker. Then after, we have seen some commands in the Docker. What are the Docker commands we have learned as of now? We executed few commands in the Docker. So the first one is Docker info, which is going to display the information of the Docker. Then Docker images. What all the images available, it is going to display those images. Then Docker pull image ID or image name. So if you want to download any image, then you can go for Docker pull command with that image name. Whenever you want to run that image, then you can go for Docker run image name or ID. For every Docker image, one ID will be generated. That a Docker image you can run by using run command. Whenever you use pull command, it is going to download the Docker image. Whenever you use the run command, first it will check in the local, do we have this image? If we don't have this image in the local, then it is going to download the image from the Docker Central Hub and it is going to run that image. If you want to see the Docker containers, then you can go for Docker PS. So what all the containers are available in our local, what containers are running in our local, we can see that containers, Docker containers by using PS command. So these are very basic commands that we learned yesterday by using Docker. Info command will display the information of the Docker software which we have downloaded and which is installed in our machine. Docker images, what all the images available in our local, we can see that by using Docker images command. If you want to download a particular image, then you can go for Docker pull command. If you want to run the particular image, then Docker run image name or ID. Whenever you do the Docker run command, if the image is available in the local, it will execute directly. If the image is not available, it will download that and it is going to execute it. Docker PS, it is used to display Docker containers which are running in our local. Very good. Now let's try to understand some Docker terminology. Let's try to understand some Docker terminology. When we are going to work with Docker, we should know about this Docker terminology. So what is this Docker terminology? That means what are the terms that we are going to use in the Docker? We are going to learn as part of this terminology. First and foremost thing that we need to learn about the Docker is the Docker file. The first and foremost thing we need to know about the Docker is a Docker file. After this Docker file, we need to know about Docker image. We need to know about Docker image. And we need to know about Docker container. And we need to know about Docker repo. Docker repo, or we can call it as a registry. We can call it as a Docker repo, or we can call it as Docker registry. Next one, we need to know about Docker engine. Docker engine. So if you want to work with Docker, then you should know this terminology. This is Docker terminology. Docker file, Docker image, Docker container, Docker registry, and Docker engine. So let's understand what is this terminology, what is the meaning of each one. Docker file. So what is a Docker file? Can anyone tell me what is a Docker file? What is a Docker file? Docker file which contains instructions for the Docker. Docker file contains instructions for the Docker. Docker file is containing instructions for Docker. Docker file contains instructions. Docker file contains instructions to create an image. Docker file contains instructions to create an image. It contains Docker domain specific keywords to build the image. In this file, we are going to use some keywords. It contains Docker domain specific keywords to build image. If you want to create a Docker image, then you need to use Docker domain specific keywords in the Docker file. Docker file contains instructions to create an image. It contains Docker domain specific keywords to build that image. Next one, what is a Docker image? Docker image is a package. Docker image is a package which contains everything. What is the meaning of everything? Our application code plus softwares plus environment plus libraries. Everything, whatever is required to run our project, everything will be available in this Docker image. So to create the Docker image, we are going to create a Docker file. Docker file contains Docker domain specific keywords. By using this Docker file, we will build the Docker image. Docker image is a package which contains everything: application code, softwares which are required, environment which is required, libraries which are required. Everything will be available in the Docker image. What is Docker container? Once image is created, we are going to run the image, then Docker container is going to start. Docker container is runtime instance of Docker container is a runtime instance of Docker image. Whatever you create in the image, that we are going to run. Whenever you run, Docker container is going to start. Docker container is runtime instance of Docker image. Now, our application will be running in the container only. Our application will execute. Our application will execute in Docker container only. So that means whatever is required to run our application, we are going to specify in the Docker file. By using that Docker file, we are going to build a Docker image. Whenever we run the Docker image, Docker is going to set up everything in the container and it is going to run that container. In that container, our application is going to execute. Our application is going to execute. Are you guys clear with my point? Next one, Docker registry is a place where we can store our Docker images. Docker registry is a place where we can store our Docker images. So we are going to create several Docker images, right? We can store the Docker images by using Docker registry. Docker registry is a place where we are going to store our Docker images. Okay. Next one, Docker engine. Docker engine. Docker engine is a software using which we are going to create the images and containers. Docker engine is a software which will execute to create images and containers. Docker engine is a software using which we will create Docker images and Docker containers. So whenever you execute Docker commands, the Docker commands will be executed by Docker engine. The Docker engine is going to create Docker images and Docker containers. Are you guys clear with my point now? Are you clear with the terminology of the Docker? Are you guys clear with the terminology of the Docker? Are you clear with the terminology of the Docker? So if you want to work with Docker, you should know this terminology. What is a Docker file? What is a Docker file? Docker file, nothing but instructions file. What we need to tell to Docker, we will tell by using Docker file. For example, for my application, I want Java software, I want Linux machine, I want Java, I want Tomcat to run my application. So in the Docker file, I am going to specify that run my Java application in the Linux machine by installing Java software and a Tomcat server. So like this, I'm going to tell to Docker by using Docker file. In the Docker file, we are going to use some keywords to write the instructions, right? What are the keywords we are going to use? Docker domain specific keywords will be available. We need to learn the Docker language. By using that Docker language, we will create a Docker file. It is just a instruction file to create our image. Then what is a Docker image? Docker image is like a package which contains everything. So whatever is required to run your application and your application code, everything will be packaged. That is called one Docker image. Docker image contains our application code, application related softwares, environment, libraries, everything will be available in the Docker image. Next, Docker container. So once you create the image, we need to run that image. Then only our application will start. So Docker container is the runtime instance of Docker image. Once the Docker image is created, when you run that image, Docker container will start. Container is the runtime instance of Docker image. Finally, our application is going to execute in the Docker container. All right. Then what is the Docker registry? Docker registry is a place where we can store our Docker images. We are going to create several Docker images. To store all the Docker images, we are going to use Docker registry. The next one, what is the Docker engine? So we are executing Docker commands. We are executing Docker commands to create the images, to run the containers. Who will do all these things in the background? That software is called as Docker engine. Docker engine software will create the Docker images and Docker containers for us. Are you clear with this terminology? Are you clear with my terminology? Docker Hub is one registry. Docker Hub is a Docker registry. Docker registry means a place we are going to store our Docker images, right? This is Docker Hub. It is called as Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a registry where we are going to store our Docker images. Where we are going to store our Docker images. Yeah, all of you, please read the Docker commands, Docker terminology, and what is the terminology? What is the purpose of it? Guys, are you clear with my point? Are you clear with this terminology? Are you clear with my terminology? Now, Docker registries is a place where we can store the Docker images, right? There are two types of registries are available. One is public registry, another one is private registry. So Docker repository, or we can say Docker registry. Now, Docker Hub is a public registry. We can use Nexus, JFrog, DTR. Those are private registries. So we can work with both the public registries as well as private registries also. So we can use both public registries and private registries. Docker Hub is a public registry everybody can store. Docker Hub is a public registry. Everybody can store the images in the Docker Hub. In the corporate world, we will use private registries. We will use private registries. What are the private registries? Nexus, JFrog, DTR, DTR, ECR are private registries. ECR is a Amazon Elastic Container Registry. AWS ECR Elastic Container Registry is available. AWS ECR, these all are private registries. Okay. Now, Docker Hub is a public registry. Nexus, JFrog, DTR, AWS ECR are the private registry. Now, so Docker Hub is a public registry. Everybody can store and retrieve images. Nexus, JFrog, DTR, AWS ECR are private registries. So these will be used within our company specific. We are going to create these private registries to store our Docker images. Are you guys clear? Docker terminology and public registry and private registry. Are you clear? Are you clear with public registry and private registry? Yes. Good. Fine. Now let's go to our instance. Yesterday we created one EC2 instance called Docker server. Let's connect it to this machine using public IP address. I'm going to mobile extram. Let me connect to this SSH remote host username EC2-user advanced SSH settings. Use the private key Linux PEM file. Clear this. Now. I connected to this machine. Let us see Docker version. Docker is installed in this machine or not? Guys, Docker software is installed in this machine. Docker software is not installed in this machine. Docker software installed in this machine. Let us check Docker info. Let us check Docker info. So connect to the Docker daemon. Is the Docker daemon running? So currently Docker is running in this machine. Docker is not running in this machine. Docker is running in this machine, or Docker is not running in this machine. No. Let's do that. Sudo service Docker start. Sudo service Docker start. Yes, my Docker started now. Let's go to Docker info. Are we able to get that? Are we able to get the Docker information? Yes, we got the Docker information. Docker images. So currently there is one image available. How to check the Docker existing images? Docker images command we are going to use to check the existing Docker images. How can I delete that image? Docker RMI image ID. Docker RMI image ID. It is going to delete that Docker image. Right. How to pull the Docker image? Docker pull image name. What is the image name? Hello world. Docker pull image name. So we are going to pull that Docker image. Once you pull the Docker image, how to run the Docker image? Docker run hello world. Docker run hello world. So whenever we run the Docker image, you can see that hello from Docker, that a Docker image got executed. That a Docker image got executed. It is telling how this Docker image got executed. Hello from Docker. This message shows that your installation appears to be working correctly. To generate this message, Docker took the following steps. The Docker client contacted the Docker daemon. Docker daemon, nothing but Docker engine. Docker engine is also called as Docker daemon background thread. Docker client contacted the Docker daemon. Docker daemon pulled hello world image from the Docker hub. So I have given Docker run hello world. Hello world is the name of the image. Docker engine pulled that hello world image from the Docker hub. Then a Docker daemon created a new container from the image which runs the executable that produces the output you are currently reading. Whenever you pull that image, then Docker engine created a container for that image and it executed. Then Docker engine streamed that output to the Docker client, which is sent to your terminal. So hello world from Docker is available, right? So whenever you execute Docker run hello world, Docker client contacted to Docker engine. Docker engine pulled this image from the Docker hub. Then Docker engine started a container to run our application. Then application started. Application provided response to Docker engine. Docker engine given the response to Docker client. Docker client printed that response on the terminal. So that is what happened here when you execute Docker run hello world. Clear? To try something more ambitious, you can run an Ubuntu container with Docker run -it Ubuntu bash. So within this Linux machine, do you want to run a Ubuntu container? Then you can go for docker run -it Ubuntu bash. So it is going to download the Ubuntu OS and it is going to run that Ubuntu as a container in our machine. It is going to run, it is going to download the Ubuntu OS machine and it is going to run it as a container. For example, I want to download MySQL. I want to run the MySQL database. For this, what we can do? First, let us see here. Let me show you Docker images. Docker images. Currently, how many images are available? Guys, currently, how many images are available? Currently, how many images are available? There is only one image available currently. I want to pull one image. Docker pull MySQL. Docker pull MySQL. So I'm doing Docker pull MySQL. Then what it is doing? What this Docker engine is doing, guys? It is downloading the image. From where it downloaded that image? From where it downloaded that image? Where is that MySQL image available? In the Docker Hub. In the Docker Hub. Now let us see Docker images. Can you see MySQL image available? Can you see MySQL image available? So pull command is going to download that image from the Docker Hub. Can I remove that MySQL image? What is the command to remove that image? Can I remove that MySQL image? What is the command? Yes, Docker RMI image ID. Let's take this image ID, give that. Now it got deleted. After deleted, let us see Docker images. Now there is only one image available. There is only one image available. Guys, let us see here. Currently, we have only one image called hello world image. Can I do like this? Docker run MySQL. Can I do Docker run MySQL without pulling? Can I directly run that image? Without pulling, can I directly run that image? Do I have that image in my local? Do I have that image in my local? No, but what I am trying to do, Docker run MySQL. MySQL is one image name. I did not pull that image directly. I am trying to run it. Check it. What happened now? What happened now? First, it is trying to check that image in the local. Unable to find the image in the local. If image is not available in the local, then it is going to download that image and it is going to execute that image. Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? So if you want to download the image, then you can go for a Docker pull image name. If you want to run the image, Docker run image name. Whenever you run a particular image, if the image is not available locally, then what is happening? It is going to pull that image from the central and it is going to run that image. It downloaded the newer image for the MySQL. When it downloaded that image, then it is going to run that image. Now let us see Docker PS, Docker PS, right? File like this, Docker containers. So it is a public image. That's why we are able to run that image directly. That's why we are able to pull that image directly. MySQL is a public image. Hello World is a public image in the Docker Hub. That's why we are able to pull them directly. They are publicly available for everybody. That's why we are able to pull them directly. Let us see here. I'm going to do Docker images, only two available. Now Docker pull Tomcat, Docker pull Tomcat. There is another image with a name called Tomcat. There is another image with a name called Tomcat. You got it. There is another image with a name called Tomcat. Now I am doing Docker pull Tomcat. It downloaded newer image called Tomcat image. Let us see Docker images. Let us see Docker images. Can you see Tomcat image available? Can you see Tomcat image available? So I pulled 3 Docker images. One Docker image name is Hello World. Second Docker image name is MySQL. Third Docker image is Tomcat. Similarly, can I pull Docker pull Ubuntu? Docker pull Ubuntu. Ubuntu is also a public image. Yes, now let us see Docker images. Can you see that Ubuntu image also we downloaded? Ubuntu is one Linux machine image. Ubuntu is a Linux flavor. Ubuntu is a Linux flavor. We are able to, if you want to run one Linux machine, if you want to run a Linux machine, then you can go for this Docker pull Ubuntu. It is going to download a Ubuntu machine image for us. So guys, with this, are you able to understand how to pull the images and how to run the images? So as of now, what are the images we pulled? What are the images I pulled? 4 images. What type of images? These all are specific to one user account, or these are public images I pulled. These are public images I pulled. These are global images. These are global images. How to pull a image which is available in a particular Docker account? If you see here, public image, there is another public image in my Docker Hub account. I created an account in the Docker Hub. I created one Docker image for my Spring Boot application. I kept this Docker image here. Now I want to pull this Docker image. Now I want to pull this Docker image. So here, this is the name of my Docker image, and it is a public Docker image. Now let me copy this name, Docker name, Docker image name, Docker pull Ashok IT slash, sorry, Docker pull Ashok IT slash Spring Boot REST API. Spring Boot REST API. Now, can you see? Am I able to pull a image which is available in my Docker Hub account? It is a public image. It is a public image. Docker images. Can you see? I'm able to pull a Docker image which is available in my Docker Hub account. Am I able to pull the Docker image which is available in my user account, guys? Tomcat, MySQL, Ubuntu, Hello World, these are generic images which are available in the Docker Hub public images. In my user account, I created one account in the Docker Hub. In my Docker Hub account, I have one image called Spring Boot REST API. Image name is Spring Boot REST API. My Docker Hub username is Ashok IT. So in the Ashok IT user account in the Docker Hub, Ashok IT is one user account. In that user account, Spring Boot REST API image available. I'm able to pull that image also by using Docker pull command. Okay. If image is public, then only we can pull it. If image is public, then only we can pull it. So some people will keep the images as a private, only they can access those images. We cannot access those images from outside. All right, guys, clear with my point, how to pull the images, how to run the images? Now, all of you create an account in the Docker Hub. Now, I will show you how to create one Docker image. So we are working with predefined Docker images now. So now I will show you how to create our own Docker image. I will show you how to create our own Docker image and how to store the Docker image in the Docker Hub. How to create our own Docker image and how to store the Docker image in the Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a public repository. First I will work with Docker Hub. Later I will work with Nexus repository also. Nexus is a private repository where we can store the images only for our company. Docker Hub is a public repository. Got it. So all of you installed Docker in your machine. Is Docker working? Fine. Now I will show you how to create our own image by using Docker file and how to publish our Docker image to Docker Hub, a public repository. Chalo. So here, as we discussed in the Docker terminology, in order to create a Docker image, what is required? In order to create a Docker image, what is required? Can you guys tell me what is required to create a Docker image? Come on, guys. In order to create a Docker image, what is required? To create a Docker image, we need a Docker file. To create a Docker image, we need a Docker file. So in the Docker file, we need to follow Docker commands. Docker commands we need to follow to create a Docker file. Currently, can you see ls-l? Do I have any files in my local? Do I have any files in my local? Currently, I don't have any files in my local. I have created account in the Docker Hub. Now, in order to push a image to the Docker Hub, we need to log into the Docker Hub account. How to log into the Docker Hub account? Docker login. So it is asking my username of the Docker Hub. My Docker Hub username is Ashok IT, and I will give my password. So you also created one account in the Docker Hub. Now you need to log in into that Docker Hub by using these credentials. All right, guys. Your password will be stored in the unencrypted in EC2 user directory. .docker file will be available. In that .docker directory available, in that config.json will be available. In that config.json, we can see that our password is stored. Our password is stored. Okay. Now I connected to my Docker account by using Docker login. Okay, successful. ls-l. Currently, I don't have anything. Now I want to create one Docker file, because if I create a Docker file, then only I can build a Docker image. Once the Docker image is created, then I can store the Docker image into Docker Hub. Then I can run the Docker image also. Then Docker container is going to start. So now I want to perform this operation. I want to create a Docker file. In the Docker file, I will write the Docker commands. Using the Docker file, I will create a Docker image. Docker image I am going to store into Docker Hub. You can run the Docker image. Then when you run the Docker image, Docker container is going to start. Very good. Let's go here. Let's check it, guys. First, I connected to my Docker Hub account, Docker login. Already connected. Login success. ls-l. Currently, nothing is available. Now, I want to create a Docker file. Go to vi Docker file. No extension, guys. Just I'm giving this file name. File name will be Docker file. Go to vi editor, then insert. Currently, we don't know the syntaxes of the Docker file. What are the commands we need to write in the Docker file? We don't know. Guys, for time being, with my knowledge, I will write one Docker file and I will show you how to build image for that Docker file and how to push that image to Docker Hub, then how to run that Docker image. So in the next session, we are going to understand about Docker file commands. Okay. So currently, I'm going to write one Docker file here from. I'm going to use a keyword called from. I want to download Ubuntu machine. To run my Docker image, I need a Ubuntu machine. I'm using from Ubuntu. So Ubuntu machine, I need to run my application from Ubuntu. Then what this has to do? Run one command, echo. I'm saying that run one, just anything, just I'm giving a command, run echo run one, I'm giving. Next one, I am writing one more command, run command echo run 2, run 1, run 2. Next, I'm giving CMD. I'm giving a CMD echo, CMD echo, echo from image, echo from image. Then I am going to give one more CMD command. Sir, now don't ask me, sir, what is run, what is CMD, what is from? That we will learn that in the next session about the Docker file syntax. So currently just observe, I'm creating one Docker file. Okay. So now here I'm going to give echo from latest, echo from latest. Now I am going to give one more run echo run 3, run 3. Okay, we don't know what is this. Just I have written one dummy Docker file by using Docker commands. From command, run command, CMD command, like that I have used several commands here. Okay, let's save it. Finally, my Docker file is ready. Can you see that my Docker file is ready? Can you see that my Docker file is ready? Yes. So what will be there in the Docker file? What will be there in the Docker file? Come on, guys. What will be there in the Docker file? Instructions will be available to execute our application. It is a set of instructions for the Docker software to execute our application by preparing the environment. Okay, so with Docker file is available, from this Docker file, I want to create Docker image. For that, we are going to use build option. Now, I'm going to use a command call. Before going to do this, guys, can you see Docker images? So there are images like Tomcat image, MySQL image, Ubuntu image, Ashok IT Spring Boot image, Hello World image is available. Okay. Now Docker file is available. I want to create one new Docker image using Docker file. To build a Docker image, Docker file is mandatory. Docker file contains a set of instructions, Docker commands to execute our application. All right. Docker build. There is a command called Docker build command, and I'm going to specify -t. So here I can specify my image name, my first image. My first image space dot, Docker space, build space, -t space, image name space dot. Docker build is the name of the command. -t is used to specify our image name. Dot represents search for the Docker file in the current location. Dot represents this current location. Search for the Docker file in the current location. So using that Docker file, I'm telling to create a Docker image with a name called my first image. Okay. Dot represents the current location. Docker build. Docker build. -t image name, my first image space. So to create the image, where is the Docker file? Docker file available in the current working directory dot. Now enter. Now can you see successfully created the Docker image? Can you see that successfully Docker image created? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6. All these commands are executed. My Docker image got created. Let us see Docker images now. Let us see Docker images. Can you see my Docker image got created? My first Docker image got created. Can you see my first Docker image got created? So what is the command I used to create my Docker image? What is the command I used to create my Docker image? First, I have created one Docker file. So what is that Docker file contains? Vi Docker file. So this is one sample Docker file I have taken. So we don't know what is the content available in the Docker file. One dummy Docker file I have created. One dummy Docker file I have created. So file name will be like this only. Docker file. There is no extension. Docker file. Now I want to build it. I want to build it. I want to build it. When I build this Docker file, I'm going to get one Docker image. My first image. My first image. So this is my Docker image. How I have created this Docker image? What is the command I have used? Docker build -t space my first image space dot. So this command I have executed, this command specifying to build a Docker image and give the name for the image. I have given the name as -t with the first image space dot. Dot represents where is your Docker file available. Where is your Docker file available? Okay, Docker image got created. Can we run that Docker image, guys? Can we run that Docker image? How to run the Docker image? Docker run image name. What is my image name? My first image. My first image. Can you see? Echo from latest. Nothing is available in that to execute. Nothing is available in that to execute. Echo from latest. So the last echo command got executed. Echo command got executed. Yes, we are able to run that Docker image. That is fine. Now I want to store this Docker image into my Docker Hub. I created one Docker image in my system by creating a Docker file. Now I want to store this Docker image in my Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a public repository where we can store the Docker images. So can you see currently in my account, in my Ashok IT account, how many images are available, guys? Currently, how many images are available in my account? Only one image is available. Now in my local, I have created one image called my first image. Can I store this image into Docker Hub? Yes, we can store the image into Docker Hub. In order to store the image into Docker Hub, first you need to tag that image. First you need to tag that image. You need to tag that image. How we are going to tag that image? Docker tag, Docker tag. What is your image name? My first image space. I want to store into Ashok IT account. Ashok IT slash my first image. Ashok IT slash my first image. So this is called image tagging. This is called image tagging. Tagging means giving a ID for that. Docker tag. This is my image name and this is my username and this is the image name. So this my first image I'm tagging to Ashok IT account. So by using tag command, Docker tag my first image, image name space Ashok IT slash my first image. Docker image tagging got completed. Now check the Docker images. Can you see this image is tagged to my Ashok IT account image? My first image is available. That image I tagged to Ashok IT image. Whenever you want to push the image to the public repository or any repository, first you need to tag that image. How I have done the tagging of that image? Image tagging I have done by using one command called docker tag image, docker tag my first image space Ashok IT slash my first image. Like this, I have created the image. Now I have tagged that image. Now I want to store the image into Docker Hub account. Already I logged in into my account. Already I logged in into my Docker account, Docker login. I already logged in into my Docker account, login success. Now push that image. So what is that image? Docker push, Docker push. What is the name of the tag? Ashoka it is slash my first image. Okay, specify this. Now enter. Using the default tag as the latest, it is preparing, mounted from library Ubuntu. It is pushing that image to my Docker Hub. Yes, done. Let's go to Docker Hub account. Can you refresh? Can you see? Am I able to push my image to my Docker Hub account? Am I able to push the Docker image to Docker Hub account? So what is the command I used to push this image to Docker Hub account? What is the command I have used to push this image to Docker Hub account? This is Docker Hub. Docker Hub. What is Docker Hub? Docker Hub is a public repo. It is a public repo. How I pushed it? I just used a command called docker push. Docker push Ashoka, that is the tag name. My first image. My first image. I have just tagged it and I have pushed it. Here I am doing build. Here I am doing push. Here I am doing push. Docker push. Now I want to run this image in multiple machines. Can I run this image in multiple machines now? Can I run this image in multiple machines now? Yes or no? Yes. So what I need to do? Pull image, run image. That's it. Wherever you want to run your application, you just need to pull the image and you need to execute your application. That's it. For our application, we have created a Docker file. Docker file contains everything which is required to run our application. I have created a Docker file. Docker file contains everything to set up the environment which is required for our application. So with this Docker file, I have created a Docker image. These are the commands I have used. Docker image building, Docker image tagging. Once the Docker image tagging is completed, then I have pushed the Docker image to Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a public repository. In which machine you want to run the Docker application, you need to pull the Docker image which is already available in the Docker Hub. That a Docker image nothing but a package which contains your application code, the softwares which are required, the libraries which are required, everything. Whatever is required to execute our application, everything will be available in Docker image. Whatever is required to run our application, everything will be available in Docker image. This is my machine 1. This is my machine 1. And this is my machine 2. This is my machine 3. So can I run the same application in the multiple machines? Do I need to bother about what softwares are available? Do I need to bother about what softwares are available in these machines? Do I need to bother about what softwares are available in this machine? We no need to bother about what softwares available in this machine. We no need to bother about what softwares available in the machine. Why we no need to bother about what softwares available in the machine? Already we configured everything in the Docker file. For my application, Ubuntu is required. I want to run my application in the Linux machine. I'm going to specify that. For my application, MySQL database is required. I will specify that. For my application, Tomcat server required. I will specify that. My application requires Java 1.8. I will specify that. Whatever the softwares we need to execute our application, we are going to keep in the Docker file. Using that Docker file, we are going to build a Docker image. Docker image nothing but a package which contains our application code and our application required softwares, libraries, environment, everything. Once you created the Docker image, that means our package is ready. In that package, everything is available. Application code will be available, operating system which is required, softwares which are required, everything will be available in the image. So that image I am storing into Docker Hub. Today I am storing into Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a public repository. In future, I will store into my private repository like a JFrog repository or a Nexus repository, Sonatype repository, like that. There are so many private repositories are available. If you are using AWS cloud, in the AWS cloud, there is one service called ECR. What is the ECR? Elastic Container Registry. Fully managed Docker container registry, share and deploy container softwares. Elastic Container Registry. You can store the Docker containers in the ECR also. If you don't want to go with public registries, you can go with a private registry. You see here, when you go for Amazon ECR, private registry is available and public registry is available. Repositories are available. Repositories are available, public registries are available, and private registry is also available. Amazon ECR is one of the service in the AWS in which we can store our images. Currently, I'm storing my image in the Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a public repository, everybody can access it. Once my image is available in the Docker Hub, can I pull that image and can I run that image in multiple machines? Yes, we are going to pull the image, Docker pull image name. Once you pull the image, you can run that image. When you run that image, Docker container will be created. What is a Docker container? In that container, our application is going to run. Docker container is a runtime instance of the Docker image. So in the real time, we are going to work like this. In the real time, we are going to work like this. Okay, for our application, we are going to create a Docker file. We are going to build the Docker file. Docker image will be created. We are going to store the Docker image in the Docker registries, either public registry or private registry. In the companies, we will use private registries like JFrog or Nexus or ECR. Okay. Once we have stored that image in the Docker registry, in which machine you want to run your application, in that machine, pull the Docker image, run the Docker image. When you run the Docker image, Docker container will start. In the Docker container, our application is going to execute. So here, if you want to run your application in the multiple computers, do you need to install Java in all the computers? Do you need to install database in all the computers? Everything will be taken care by Docker. Do we need to install all the softwares in the machines? Everything will be taken care by Docker to run our application. Come on, guys. Do I need to set up the softwares required? Do I need to set up the softwares and versions which are required to run our application? Who will take care of those things? Who will take care of those things? Docker. Docker. So you got the Docker working process. How we are going to work with Docker in the real time? Are you able to understand my concept now? So for every project, one Docker file will be created. For every project, one Docker file will be created. Docker file, nothing but set of instructions that we are going to give for Docker software to execute our application. For every application, one Docker file will be created. In the Docker file, set of instructions will be available. So with this, we understood what is a Docker file. We don't know how to write it. That we are going to discuss in the next session. So, but we know what is a Docker file. Docker file is a file which contains set of instructions for the Docker. So using the Docker file, we are going to create a Docker image. Docker image is a package which contains application code plus softwares which are required to execute our application. The Docker image we can store in the repository, either public repository or private repository. Public repository means Docker Hub. If you want to store in the private, you can go for AWS ECR, Elastic Container Registry in the AWS, where we can store our Docker images. Or you can go for other private repositories like JFrog repository, Nexus repositories like that. So by using Docker push command, we are going to push our Docker image to those repositories. In which machine you want to run your application, you no need to set up any software to run your application. You just need to pull the Docker image. Docker image is a package which is having everything. Your application, the softwares which are required for application, everything is already available in the image. You just pull the image and you run the image. When you run the image, it will create a container. Container will take care of everything which is required to execute our application. Our application will be executed in a container. Our application will be executing in a container. Clear, guys? I'm going to show you how to push the Docker images to private repositories as well as AWS ECR also. I'm going to set up Nexus repository. I'm going to push the Docker image to Nexus repository, as well as I will show you how to push the Docker image to ECR also, Amazon ECR. I already shown you how to push the Docker image to Docker Hub. Similarly, I will show you how to push the Docker image to ECR service in the AWS as well as the Nexus private repository. Once you push the image to those repositories, in which machine you want to run, you can just pull the image and you can run it. When you run the image, your application is going to start. So we understood this process. Now what we need to learn? We need to learn how to write the Docker files. How to write a Docker files for the application. Application will have different components. Application will have different components. For my application, I need Ubuntu OS, I need Java 1.8, I need Tomcat 9, I need MySQL, okay, I need Kafka, I need Redis, like this. So different softwares we need to run our application. So those softwares we are not going to install manually. We are going to tell to Docker to download everything. How we are going to tell to Docker? By using Docker file. So we need to learn how to write the Docker file. Once you learn the Docker file syntax, then we can start writing the Docker files for real world applications. We can run those applications by using Docker containers. So with this, theoretically we completed what is Docker, what is containerization, what is Docker, how Docker is going to execute, what are the Docker commands, and what is the Docker terminology. I hope now you got the concept. Docker file. Docker file contains instructions to create an image. It contains Docker domain specific keywords. We need to learn those keywords in the next session. Docker image. Docker image is a package which contains everything. Application code, softwares, environment, libraries, everything will be available in the Docker image. Docker container. Docker container is a runtime instance of Docker image of our application which will execute. Docker registry is a place where we can store our Docker images. Docker Hub, Nexus, ECR, like that we can use multiple Docker registries. You can go for Nexus, you can go for JFrog, you can go for ECR. ECR means Elastic Container Registry, which is provided by AWS. Docker Hub is public, remaining all are private. What is a Docker engine? Docker engine is a software which is going to run our Docker commands. Docker image will be created. Docker container will be created by Docker engine only. Docker engine is also called as Docker daemon. Docker engine is also called as Docker daemon. Docker engine is also called as Docker daemon. Good. Next. So here we have seen the working culture of the Docker, how people will work in the Docker, how people will use Docker in the real time. People will write the Docker files for the application. Every application will contain one Docker file. Using the Docker file, we will build a Docker image. That image we are going to push to Docker Hub, right? Or we can push to our private repository. So wherever you want to run that application, you just need to pull the image and you need to run the image. You don't need to set up anything. You don't need to set up anything. Clear, guys? Clear for all of you? So what is our next topic? So what is our next topic? Come on. What is our next topic? Docker files creation. Docker files creation. That we are going to discuss in the Monday session. So tomorrow Sunday, so no class tomorrow. So we are going to discuss them. Docker commands, Docker file creation, we are going to discuss in the Monday session. Thank you guys.